everyone, and welcome back to the Level Up English podcast. My name is Michael, and this is a special conversation episode. I'm really excited today because I am talking to Stephen DeVincenzi, who joined me from the UK. Actually, we found out while we were talking that we both lived really close to each other at one point, but we didn't know about each other back then. It's actually an interesting origin story because according to Stephen, he found out about me because a viewer who was watching his interview on Luke's English podcast thought that Luke was talking to me, and it was actually Stephen. So I don't know if we sound similar or not, but that was a nice compliment for me anyway. But anyway, Stephen is the founder and the host of the Simple English News Daily podcast. And in short, that's called SEND7. SEND7. It's a 7-minute daily news update kind of aimed towards English learners. So if you're learning English as a second language, this is aimed towards you. And I think this is an interesting choice for a guest today because I don't often talk about news. In fact, I never really talk about news on the podcast. I try to keep it evergreen and I try to keep things always relevant on the podcast. And to be honest, I don't really know enough about the news to have a good informed opinion to share. So I think this conversation will be interesting, first of all, and hopefully a lot of you will go over and check out Stephen's podcast as well, because it's a great way to learn about what's happening in the world while practicing your listening skills. We talk about that more today, of course. So in this episode, we talk about, I guess, the reason why Stephen started the SEND7 podcast. And we talk a little bit about learning English from the news, maybe the pros and the cons of doing so, and also some methods like how can you learn by listening to the news. And actually, there's some really good ideas that Stephen has, some of which I hadn't thought of before. So I might be using them myself in my own language learning. So really good tips and advice in this one as well. We also talk about what you should do when you find advanced words in the news. Like when you come across a really difficult word, what should you do? Should you try to learn it, or how do you tackle those difficult words? We end the podcast towards the end talking about fake news and bias in the news. And a big problem that I have is getting stressed out by the news. How can you watch all this news like Stephen does and not get too stressed about it? That's something that I think will be useful for some of you. And of course, we have to end on a positive note. So we finish the conversation by talking about good news stories that you may not be aware of. And we talk about why Stephen is so optimistic despite consuming so much news every day. So maybe you'll end today feeling optimistic as well. So really hope you enjoy this one. As always, transcripts and quizzes and bonus materials are available on the website. If you want to find out more, you can become a member to access these at levelupenglish.school. For now, I will hand you over to Stephen and let you listen in on our conversation. Hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I am happy to be joined today by Stephen from SEND7. Welcome. How are you?
I am very well, thank you, Michael. How are you?
I'm also very well. Very well. Thank you for joining me. I'm really interested to learn more about what you do and hear about it because it's something, I'll be totally honest, I've admitted on the podcast before, something that I don't really know anything about. So I may not be the best person to talk to, but that's why I'm glad you're here. So maybe could you start by telling us a bit about what it is you do and maybe even what led you to this point as well?
Yeah, sure. So, well, for anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Stephen DeVincenzi, and I'm from England, from the southeast of England. A town called Canterbury is where I live at the moment. And I have been a teacher for most of my life in different ways. I travelled and taught in quite a few different countries. I lived in Spain for a year and taught English there, and I lived in Australia for a year where I was working as a special needs teacher, and then I lived in India where I was teaching lots of different things, and then in Thailand, the same as you are living now, and I was teaching English there, and then in Argentina for 2 years, and also in England more recently I've been a primary school teacher, and also during this time I have developed my own love of languages, and I've learnt Spanish and French, and today my main job is making the Simple English News Daily podcast, also known as SEND7. Simple English News Daily in 7 minutes. That's an acronym. And I kind of came to the idea of making this podcast through my own language learning journey. So I learnt French and Spanish largely I did learn it at school as well. I did learn them at school as well, but also I kind of listened to a lot of news on the radio and reading as well, and I thought that this idea of a podcast, like simplifying the news for English learners, would be a good idea, because it's something that I would listen to myself in French and Spanish, and maybe other languages if it existed. And in English it didn't exist, so I thought that I would make it myself. There you go. There's my life in a nutshell.
I mean, that's a really impressive nutshell, to be honest. So there's lots of travel, lots of teaching. That seems to be a pattern. So it sounds like travel is a passion or a hobby for you. It's something that you've done a lot of, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's really, really important. Yeah, but basically all of my 20s were traveling. And before, yeah, I've been to, I think, 60 countries or something like that. And
wow,
so
that's incredible.
Thanks. Yeah, and I've worked in 7 or 8 or something, in little ways. So I was always kind of thinking, working somewhere and then taking trips to other plases. Like, I know just before we started recording, you said that you were doing something similar in Thailand, right? Like you're living in Thailand now, and you've just taken a trip to Japan, and yeah, there you go. So you must have been to quite a few places around there as well, Michael.
I feel like I'm maybe approaching 30 countries,
yeah.
So still a way behind you, but maybe I'm following in your footsteps. I guess we've got something in common there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, it's really cool. I love the idea for your do you call it a podcast?
Yeah, definitely.
Show,
podcast. Yeah. In fact, I'm only starting to put it on YouTube now. Hopefully, by the time people will be listening to this, it will be on YouTube. But it's been going as a podcast for almost 4 years. So yeah,
amazing.
Just it's a podcast. Yeah.
Nice. I love the idea of it, because I feel like when it comes to language learning, a big way to make it enjoyable and fun is just to do what you would do in your native language, but try to do it in the language you're learning. So if you watch the news in your native language, then why not do it in English? But I guess the big problem that I'm sure you're familiar with is the news can be quite inaccessible for many people. It can be quite difficult, advanced vocabulary. So I know the way you do it, you speak very slowly and it sounds natural, but also very clear and understandable. So I know you said native speakers, well, on the website you said native speakers sometimes benefit from it too, and I think I probably should listen to a few more to be up to date.
yeah I think maybe about 10%, 20% of the listeners of SEND7 are native speakers, and it's just, I think it is just from people who just want to get a summary of everything that's happening in the world really quickly, because we cover news from every continent every day. So yeah, there's that kind of added benefit, which it wasn't my intention, but I'm very happy that native speakers do enjoy listening to it as well. That's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really nice. I think there are some podcasts like that they're made for English learners, but like even myself, I can enjoy listening to them. There's a few that come to mind that I think they do that really well. So that's something to be proud of. That you've got a niche,
Yeah.
but also somehow it's also kind of wide audience at the same time. Can quite explain.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. There are some podcasts that are made for English learners that I've listened to as well, just because I'm really interested in the topic. Shall I name some?
Yeah. I mean, it's always nice
Yeah,
for listeners
totally.
to hear more, right?
Yeah, like Thinking in English by Tom. Yeah, like that's really good. Like sometimes he'll have an episode that I listen to. I might put the speed up a little bit so that I could get through it faster. But and English Learning for Curious Minds as well, by Alistair Budge. That's as well really gets me sometimes.
Yeah, amazing. I was thinking, I know all the listeners will be familiar, but I was thinking of Luke's English podcast.
Yeah.
And whenever I listen to an episode, he's just got such a nice way of talking that it's very engaging. I don't get bored.
Yeah, totally. In fact, I told you this, but I thought it was quite funny actually. Maybe the listeners could know this as well. That I originally contacted you, Michael, because I was a guest on Luke's English podcast. And somebody in a comment said that they thought that I was you. They thought like, I've been listening to this for half an hour, and I thought that Stephen was Michael from Level Up English. There you go. I don't even think that we sound that similar, really, but maybe we do.
So just to clarify, this is about sound and not appearance, right?
I think it's about sound. Yeah. We have quite different hairstyles, don't we? From a visual perspective.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I used to have hair a bit more like yours when it was existing.
Yeah.
But I can't hear too much similarity. I guess we're both from the south, but I'm from the southwest, so there's still some distance there. But I guess if you're not used to all the variety of accents in the UK, maybe it sounds similar.
Maybe so. Yeah.
So I'll take it as a compliment anyway.
Me too.
I want to ask you more about news, obviously. So well, maybe you don't in some ways. I was going to say, why do you think it's a good idea to learn from the news? And perhaps there are some ways in which it may not be good. I don't know if you would have any answers for that.
Yeah, for sure. Like the negatives of it would generally be that the way that people speak when they're telling the news can be a bit unnatural. So people generally don't have conversations in the same way that news reports are given. So, I mean, that can be a bit of a downside. And that's why I wouldn't recommend only listening to the news for your if you want to learn English. Otherwise, you might end up sounding a bit robotic. And then also it can be complicated. So I suppose even with Simple English News Daily, my podcast, even when I'm trying to make it more simple, there are some things which are impossible to simplify. So I'd say if you're not maybe a B1 level, then maybe the news isn't the best thing. It's probably always going to be above B1, I suppose. And of course, it's also not for everyone as well. Like some people are just not going to be so interested in the news, and that's fine. You know, that's if it's not for you, then it's not for you. That doesn't matter. But on the plus side, it is it's regular, so it comes out every day. It's fresh all the time. One of the big benefits is that if you're familiar with a story in your own language, then it can be much easier to understand the story in English, because you already kind of know a bit of the way that the story is going. You can probably guess the vocabulary a bit easier, something like that. It's also very easy to access. You know, anybody can look at the news on the BBC website or listen to radio stations that are broadcast around the world, podcasts, of course. It's very easy to get to, and my favorite thing about it is that it's just really easy to slip into your routine. Like I start every day listening to a podcast in French and then listening to the radio in Spanish. And they're just like, I listen to a French news podcast for 10 minutes every day when I'm making coffee. It's just so easy to slip into my routine. And and then I leave some Spanish radio on the background sometimes. It's just very, very easy to get into. It's like a bite-size chunk of language to kind of maintain your progress, I suppose. And actually, quite a lot of the people who are listening to Simple English News Daily are not people who are like actively learning English today. They're people who are maybe they've finished their formal education and they just want to kind of have something going along in the background of always having a little bit of contact with English. And they do that with SEND7, so that's nice.
And I think 7 minutes as well is very manageable. Like, speaking for myself, if I came and I saw every episode was 45 minutes, I think, 45 minutes on the news, maybe not for me.
Yeah.
But 7 minutes, as you said, very manageable. Make a cup of coffee and it's almost done. Like,
exactly.
I felt that's the perfect length, not to get overwhelming. Isn't it?
Totally. It's a very low barrier for entry, so you can kind of figure out if you want to listen to it very easily as well. You can spend 7 minutes and go, I think I will listen to that. Or you go, actually, no, I'm not gonna have that. But with something longer, then maybe it takes you a longer time to make that decision as well.
Yeah. Out of kind of personal curiosity, how would you rate your French level when you're listening to this? How much are you understanding?
Maybe you mean when I'm listening to a French podcast, like a French podcast?
Yeah.
I'd say my level is probably like maybe B2 in French.
Oh, nice.
And I think, when I listen to standard French radio, maybe I understand like 70% or something like that. But then when I listen to this podcast that I listen to every day, for the people who are interested, it's called Journal en Français Facile, and that maybe 90%, but it's spoken a bit slower than other news, so that's useful. Yeah, but my Spanish is much better than my French. My Spanish is, I'm very, very fluent in Spanish.
Oh, cool! That's really nice. Really nice. You're dispelling the myth of the monolingual Brit, I guess. I heard recently it's one of the most monolingual countries in the world, so it's always nice to meet people that break that pattern.
Yeah, it's true. I've got to say, I want to, even though I'm not a monolingual Brit, I'm a trilingual Brit, I suppose. I also want to stand up for the English people and Americans and other native English people who are monolingual a little bit, because I think it genuinely is harder to learn other languages when English is your first language, just because it is the dominant language of the world. Like even when I go to France or Spain or something now, and I speak something in French or Spanish, people often respond to me in English, just because they assume that I'm foreign, and so I need to be spoken to in English. And I think, and having everything around you in English all the time, it makes learning other languages more difficult, I think. But it can be done, and it should be done. That's a really good point.
Yeah. That's a really good point. It's much harder to. I guess a big part of learning a language, or big helper in learning a language, is necessity. Like if you need to learn, it's going to be much easier. If you're in a country where they don't speak your native language, you have to learn another language to communicate.
Absolutely.
Whereas English is international, as you said, so it does become harder. Yeah, and people are. Yeah, I guess there's this very special kind of point where, like, before this point, your level in their language is lower than their level of English.
Right.
So they're kind of like, well, why would I speak my language to you when English is easier?
Exactly.
If you can really work to that point where your language skills are better, then that's, I guess, where you get more practice. But it's hard to get there.
It is. Yeah. And also, like, there's English is kind of in the background of the world in many different ways. Like, a lot of people in the world today will watch films and TV and things like that, which is made in the United States or something. and maybe just watching it with subtitles or something like that. So even if they don't actually understand all of the English, they're hearing it all the time, something like that. I remember going to a party in Germany a long time ago, and I asked a guy. I was talking to a guy for a while, and I said, "Wow, your English is so good. Why is it so good?" And he just said, "The internet is in English." I was like, "Oh, okay." There you go. He didn't even have any specific reason. It was just because he lives on the internet, and he said, "Yeah, the internet is in English." So there you go.
Yeah, it's interesting how it changes like that.
Yeah. Have you learned any? Have you learned any Thai since you've been in Thailand?
Oh, it's a tricky question, that one. I get that a lot living here, but I have been learning for a few years Japanese and Chinese.
Right.
Chinese is the more recent one, relatively, but obviously they're both hard languages and they're both kind of tricky Asian languages. And I'm picking up some Thai, but I'm not intending to kind of make it a focus and get fluent in Thai, just because I feel like, well, I know it would affect my other language studies. And although I'm living here, I'm not going to be here forever. That's my reasoning. So I want to focus on those two.
Do you plan to move to Japan or China or something?
Yeah. I would love to. Yeah. I mean, we're hoping we can move to Japan after this in a year or two maybe, but it's a hard place to get into, so just see how I'm open. We'll see how it goes, but if we do, I'll be ready.
Yeah. And it's a good motivation for continuing to practice your Japanese. Yeah,
definitely.
Excellent.
I do feel like Thailand is one of those places where even though you really should learn the language or a little bit, it's very easy not to, because everyone's so friendly. No one makes you feel bad for not knowing it. And if you know how to say like please, thank you, hello, then you can get by in most situations, honestly. It's kind of feel guilty saying that, but it's the truth.
That's good. Because a long time ago when I was there 7 years ago or something, I knew enough to get by like that. Also, the numbers are quite easy to learn. I remember being able to count as high as I needed to, because it's just, I can't remember, but after you get past 10, then it just goes like 10 and 1, which really makes sense. I can't remember what it is now. And then like 123 or something was just like 100, 2 tens, 3. No? Anyway, I remember that being really useful and simple.
Yeah. I think Asian numbers generally are much simpler than like European languages. So that's really useful. That goes a long way, where I want this one, and they say, what one do you mean? And I don't know how to say the item on the menu, but I can just say this one that costs $35. Yeah. I can say the price of it, and then they know what I mean.
Great. Yeah, great. Yeah, excellent.
Let's not get too sidetracked. I could talk about that all day. But
go ahead.
I guess leading on from the previous question about listening to French and obviously listening to English, what are some ways in which people can learn from the news in terms of like learning methods? Is it simply just listening, or is there anything else that you might recommend doing to pick things up?
Yeah, I suppose if you have the ability to take a few moments to read something as well, then of course that's going to be really, really good. You can get improve your reading skills there. Listening, you can do it on the radio, podcasts, etc. Writing, I suppose you would have to take a little bit more of your own effort, put a bit more practice in yourself. Maybe you could, if you're listening to a podcast, maybe you could go, I'm going to write down what I think has been said in that story, maybe summarize it, put it into your own words, maybe try to predict the future by writing what you think is going to happen in a story. Quite a difficult thing to do in the world, but maybe you could try that. If you have a friend to do this with, then you could both try and write your own summaries or write your own predictions and then compare them together. And so that's listening, reading, writing, and speaking. Speaking, I suppose you could, if you have somebody to speak to, then of course you can try and talk about the stories that you've been hearing, or you can talk about your own news stories, things that are happening in your local area or something like that. And if you don't have somebody to talk to, then you can talk to yourself, which is always fun. You can talk in the mirror, or you can think in your head as you're walking down the street. But yeah, and if there's any words that you don't understand, of course, you can always go and look them up. There probably will be in the news some words that you don't understand, especially if it's just made for native speakers. Yeah, you can go and look them up in the dictionary or something, and then try and use them later on in your writing or speaking or something.
That was another thing I was going to ask, because I know, well, I know that this is a problem for me, and I'm sure other people too, that when I'm reading, I can get really, what's the word? Really stuck on a difficult word. If it's just like the odd difficult word, like I can tell it's really advanced.
Yeah.
I don't quite know what to do. I guess the completionist in me, if you're a completionist, right, it's you kind of want to do everything 100%.
Yeah.
The completionist in me wants to learn every single word. But what would you do personally, or what would you recommend when people come across like a really difficult word, like related to some advanced news story?
I suppose I am used to not looking for everything, because I listen to a lot of podcasts and radio and things in French and Spanish, and I'm used to allowing myself certain specific words that I don't understand, and because of the context, you can generally just guess around it what it probably means. But definitely there have been times when I've searched for things, looked things up, but yeah, I think one of the nice things about having the radio on in the background, or just having something routine in your daily diet of learning, is that you don't have to look up everything. You shouldn't expect to understand 100% of what you're listening to. In fact, if you are understanding 100% of what you're listening to, then it's probably too easy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if I listened to all the episodes of your podcast, I probably wouldn't understand several words along the course of each day. So
yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, I think even for native speakers too. But I guess what came to my mind as you were saying that is, I don't know, it just slipped my mind. I lost my train of thought right in the middle there. Never mind.
Yeah, that's right. When you find it, you can jump back on the train.
Let me go to a slightly new topic now. And this is a big problem that we have today. And I suppose it's less about English learning now, but it's a more general topic. Yeah. And that's fake news.
Yeah.
And also bias as well. They're kind of different, but in the same category. So how can we avoid fake news? Let's start there.
Yeah,
maybe?
let's start there. Yeah, it's a tough one, but the truth is, we're probably just at the beginning of this problem. It's probably during the 21st century. I think the problem of working out what's real and what's not real is just going to be more and more important. And people disagree on this, of course. There's some pretty major disagreements in the world about what's real, which is can be a bit worrying. But I suppose for me, I generally choose to go for news from bigger, more widely respected publications. For example, Reuters is a massive news agency. Associated Press, another massive news agency. They have journalists all over the world, thousands and thousands of journalists in loads of different places who are really on the ground, you would say, or everywhere. So the information that they are providing is, generally going to be pretty good. You can also just check a lot of different sources. So if Reuters says one thing and the BBC says the same, and Sky says the same, and the New York Times says the same, and Al Jazeera says the same, it's probably going to be pretty accurate. The truth is, no source is going to be 100% accurate all the time. It's just not possible. But yeah, using lots of different sources is a good way of trying to find a more accurate picture of what's going on. But then also, the opposite of that, for places that I would say are not reliable, I would say is sources that are not accountable. So if, for example, somebody just makes a YouTube video and doesn't use information from reliable sources, and that person is not accountable, then it's probably less likely to be true, or more likely to be fake news. One way that I like to think about it, using a bit of an American method, is could this person be sued? So, for example, if the Guardian or the New York Times says that Michael from Level Up English has, I don't know, been dodging paying taxes or something like that. Yeah, exactly.
Who told you?
Right. Then if Michael from Level Up English could say that's not true, and you could sue them. You could take them to court and go, that's not true, and I can prove it, blah blah blah, and you know, they might have to publish that they got a story wrong, or they might even have to give you some money or something like that. Whereas if from the fake news sources, they're generally not accountable, and you wouldn't have any way of getting back at them. So, you know, if some random website that's just been started and by some guy in his basement says something that makes the same story, if you tried to say that it wasn't true, it's very likely that nothing would come from that. Is that a bit complicated, or does that make sense?
Yeah. So my understanding is, if they are suable,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a word, but if they're suable for something, then they're more. You can almost trust them a little bit more, because they have something to lose if they lie.
Exactly right. Yeah, and also another thing that they have to lose is their reputation. So, like, if the Guardian started publishing things that were quite easy to show were not actually true, then people would stop using the Guardian. People would stop looking at the Guardian. You know, they'd say, "Hang on a minute." You know, if the Guardian says the Earth is flat, then maybe after a few weeks, people are going to say, "Okay, well, maybe I can't trust this other article from the Guardian. Maybe I can't trust this." It's quite a difficult thing to navigate. But I think, we shouldn't give up, because it's very important. And in the future, and we're coming to the age now of AI made pictures and videos and audio. I think it's going to become more and more important to use reliable sources like that.
Yeah, there was a video. Well, I think it's been spread around the internet now, but it's very scary how good AI is getting at making videos. And have you seen the recent ones that came out in February, where the AI was not recreating, but it was just making these scenes from nothing? And like, one of them was just like a woman walking in the street and people walking by some cherry blossoms. Did you happen to see them?
I did. Yeah. I think they were relatively short, but still incredible things, like 20 seconds or 30 seconds. But it's really, really amazing. And
if you're kind of just watching kind of casually, not really paying attention, it looks totally real. Like, it's scary. Absolutely. And this is right at the beginning of the technology too.
Exactly. It's just going to be exponentially more impressive from here. So yeah, this is just the beginning. And I actually have a strange theory. I might be wrong, but I have a strange, possibly unpopular theory that what's typically known as mainstream media today is actually going to become... It's going to have another heyday, we could say. Like, it's going to come back into necessity from people wanting to or needing to know what is actually real and what's not real. Like, I can imagine in 2050 or something, if anybody has the ability to make a video of saying, like, I don't know, one country declared war on another country or something like that, it's going to be much more necessary to have these gatekeepers. Maybe it would be the New York Times or the Guardian or something, who actually have the information of saying, no, we know that this is not true, so don't worry about it, guys, everything's fine, I think maybe these companies and things will be needed for that purpose, maybe.
That's a really interesting prediction. I feel like you might be right, that there's still some hope for mainstream media, right? That people need to trust where they're getting information from, and they need to trust whether it's correct. That's interesting. We'll see. I'm sure it won't be long until we find out whether that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. With how fast everything is moving at the moment, it's difficult to predict, but yeah, we will see very soon.
I would like to ask you a question. I can say maybe it's like a selfish question, because I would like to know the answer to this personally, but I feel like it might be useful for other people too, maybe.
Yeah.
And this is, how can you watch the news or consume the news and avoid getting stressed out? You're hearing about all these bad things. It's often not good news, is it?
Yeah.
How do you consume the news of the world and not let it get you down?
Yeah, somehow, I'm an incredibly optimistic person. I really am, despite the fact that I live in a big bubble of news all the time. Like, I actually read and consume more news than people would even imagine, just from morning till night all the time. So yeah, but somehow I'm quite positive about most things. I suppose one of the important things is that I know that bad stories make the news, right? Like, when something bad happens, it happens instantly. There was an earthquake, lots of people died, it's on the news, right? That's why. But I also know that good things that happen in the world don't make the news because they don't happen in a day. It's not like the opposite of an earthquake happening and lots of people dying never happens. You don't get loads of people suddenly being alive or something. But the good things that happen in the world, poverty coming down, more people having access to clean water, and these fantastic advances in medicine and access to healthcare and things like that. These things don't happen in a day. They happen really slowly over a long period of time, and they are benefiting people every single day. But they don't make the news in the same way. And in Simple English News Daily, I always try to put something fun or positive in every episode to try to remind people that actually, don't worry, everything's getting better. Really, it is. Because it is. It really is getting better. The world is overall becoming a safer place, a place where people live longer, and a place where people are more likely to be able to fulfill their dreams, as cheesy as that sounds, but it's true. And on all of these negative things that happen every day, the reason that they're in the news is because they're big, important things that happened on that day. But I know, and I hope other people know, that overall the world is actually becoming a better place.
It's really nice that you include that kind of positivity in there as well, because I do think some people do struggle with that. And yeah, I agree. I feel like, I guess we always have to give the disclaimer that, of course, there's still a lot of suffering in the world. But the question that always comes to my mind is, if I were to ask people, let's say you can choose any time period to be born in, from now way back into the past, like you can pick a time. I think most people would choose to live now, because we've got modern healthcare, and as you said, there's less poverty than there was in the past generally. And if you were just to be thrown into a random body in the world, you're more likely to have a good life today than you were in the past.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
It's on an upward trend, isn't it?
It really is, and that's not just true in the richest countries in the world. So if you were just going to be randomly born in 2024, in, I don't want to say every country in the world, because maybe there is some really specific place where life is worse today than 50 years ago, but almost everywhere in the world today would be the best time to be alive, almost everywhere. So yeah, it really is a positive thing to think about. But yeah, so hopefully that can stop people from getting stressed. Yeah, and really, hopefully you should be able to have a disconnect between the things that you read in the news and the way that you live your life every day, because 99% of stories are not going to affect you directly at that time. It's a good thing to think about them, because you are, a member of this human race that we're all a part of, but you shouldn't let it get you down.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a really good one. Another thing that I kind of decided, I don't know, you can let me know your opinion on this, but whenever I see a news story where the headline is a question, I just completely disregard it, because there were so many like that on particular websites and stuff in the past where I would check, and it would just make me feel really anxious and stressed, and it would often be like, is there going to be a new wave of COVID that kills us all?
Yeah.
And then you read the article and it's like, maybe not actually.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of fear mongering, and it's trying to get these clicks, and it's not really news. It's just like, this might happen, but also it might not. And when I realized that kind of rule of thumb to ignore the question headlines, I felt a lot better too. But have you come across that yourself?
I haven't thought specifically about question headlines, but there are definitely certain types of headlines that are obviously like clickbaity headlines. Things that just, maybe the story itself isn't that good, but they just really want to make you click. So yeah, I would avoid them. But I think it depends on the website or news source that you're on. I think a lot of them are not going to do that. Like, for example, I wouldn't expect to have that on The Guardian or on The Times or the New York Times or something. Probably. Yeah.
I think that's a good word. Clickbait. If anyone doesn't know, clickbait is when maybe a title or a picture is almost tricking you into clicking on it with a very interesting sounding headline or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, very important thing to look out for these days.
Yeah, or ambiguous as well, like something like, "Oh, you'll never believe how much gold is worth today." Like, it doesn't say whether it's good or bad. It just leaves it ambiguous, so it makes you go, "Oh, is it going to be high? Is it going to be low? Okay, I've got to click to find out." It's clickbait.
Yeah, it's almost like an open question there. You have to kind of click to answer it and kind of feel better about it. Yeah. It's very, very, very important to learn these things, these concepts. Maybe we can finish on. So I did mention to you before we started recording that I try my best to keep this podcast mostly evergreen, which for the listeners means whenever you're listening in the future, hopefully this episode will be relevant. So I don't tend to talk about like current topics, which maybe that's a good reason people can go over to your podcast and hear all about it over there. Something that we haven't given away today. But maybe we can end on some positivity, because we mentioned that just now.
Yeah.
So can you think of any positive stories that maybe people might not be aware of? Maybe even better, maybe ones that might still be ongoing.
Sure.
In a few months' time, or
absolutely, yeah. So just some like data points. I know I was saying there about how the world is getting better overall, and yeah, some ways in which that is true. I think since the year 2000, the amount of women who die giving birth has dropped dramatically. Like, I think it's only 2/3 of what it was just in 2000. So that's only in 20 years. It's come down really, really fast. That is probably primarily just from just slight advances in healthcare, in maternity hospitals, and access to clean water and things like that. And actually, access to clean water is another really important one as well. The amount of people who have drinking water in their own home is just really exponentially growing as well. That's gone up by something like 2 billion people having access to water in their clean water, drinking water in their own home since the year 2000 as well, which is just such an incredible thing to have for every individual, to like, the ability to just drink the water from your tap in your house compared to having to leave the house and going to find it. So it's such a small thing that can make dramatic impacts on people's lives. So that's really nice. And then, so that's more from the medical point of view. Oh, actually, another massive medical thing is malaria. In fact, before this new malaria vaccine, which is being tried now, deaths have already come down from malaria by about half in the last 20 years as well. But now there's this malaria vaccine, which in 2024 is being used properly for the first time. I think it started in Ghana in January. And it's going to be rolled out in quite a few other places as well. It's not perfect. Like, it doesn't mean that if you have it, you'll never get malaria. But people have been working on malaria vaccines for absolutely decades. Like, I think something like 70 years or something like that. And it's just been really, really, really difficult to produce, to make. And now it's finally a reality. So this is something which hopefully is going to bring down malaria cases and deaths for future generations. And again, that's just the beginning of it now. So I think I'm not sure how effective the current one is, which is being used in Gaza. Maybe it's only about half, 50% effective or something like that. But this is hopefully just going to improve and improve over time, and used at the same time as the current methods, medicines and bed nets and things like that. This should really, really help malaria for the future. So those are some medical things, and away from the medical things, there's some animal conservation projects that have just gone really, really well as well. The number of rhinoceroses. What's the plural of
that? Sounds right. I'm sure that's right. I can't think of any feels it sounds better.
Yeah, good. Questioning myself there. There are more rhinoceroses today than there were 20 years ago as well. So this has been.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's and the number was going down and down and down and down, and then conservation projects that have been going on for I can't remember what it is, 20 years or 30 years, have actually started to really work. And now the population is going back up again. That's in Africa. And a similar thing has happened to the elephant population as well. So there's more elephants today than there were, I can't remember how many years ago, 20 years ago or something like that. But it's coming back up again. And there's actually even too many elephants in a few places. And they've been shipping them off to other places as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And in India, they have a growing tiger population for the first time as well. And that's obviously a completely different place of the world. But their conservation projects are working well there as well. There you go. There's a few good things.
Amazing. I'm not sure if the local Indians are happy about the tiger one. Like I think there are some tigers in Thailand as well, like in the mountains or the jungle, but it always scares me to think I could run into them if I go on like a deep hike into the jungle. Not that I would, but
yeah. I mean, I'm not sure exactly where they are in India, but I think they are in places where that's quite far away from people.
Hopefully.
Which sounds difficult in India because it's such a densely populated place, but yeah, there are going to be a few places with less people.
Yeah, I mean, that is amazing. I'm glad I asked you because I feel positive now. I didn't know about some of them. I didn't know about the malaria one. I actually tricked, not quite tricked, but this was one that my students got wrong because I gave them a few pictures of animals and I asked them, which animal is the most deadly out of these? And it's like, tigers, lions, sharks, mosquito. Yeah. No one picked mosquito, but they're incredibly deadly, aren't they? And I feel like it's nice to hear progress in the area of that disease.
Yeah, they're really
Nice.
deadly, and
Yeah.
even in places of the world where they're not deadly, like in Europe, they're really annoying, aren't they? Gosh, the amount of nights that I've had in Spain or in Thailand or something, where I've spent the whole night trying to kill a single mosquito and I just can't. It's really, really annoying. But
Yeah.
yeah, but
It's the only animal that I'm happy to kill. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, same here. Yeah, I've got a funny story as well, actually. Kind of funny. I don't know if it's dangerous, but recently in South Korea, there was this phenomena, I guess, of people eating toothpicks. Have you heard about that?
I haven't.
No,
I don't know if I want to hear.
Yeah, so there were these toothpicks, or there are these toothpicks, which were made to be biodegradable, and so they were made using, I think it was potato starch and or sweet potato starch or something. Sorry, I can't remember the story exactly, but it was made by using some kind of foodie starch. And sold just so that they would be able to be biodegradable. But then obviously some people realised that if you deep fried them, they were kind of tasty. So and it became a bit of a thing on social media of people showing them like frying these toothpicks and then putting salt on them and eating them. And then the South Korean food agency had to put out a warning saying, please don't eat these toothpicks, they're not safe to eat. They might taste nice, but they're not safe to eat, please stop eating them. There you go.
That's funny. It reminds me, I think there's some packing peanuts that were similar, right, where they're made from some starchy material, and like it's kind of the light plasticky looking things to help protect your parcels.
Yeah.
And yeah, apparently they're like kind of technically edible, but you wouldn't want to eat it just because of the way they're stored, and it's probably just kept in really dirty environments.
Yeah.
I don't know. Don't quote me on that. Don't go eating them to test, but that's what I heard.
Yeah, that's it.
Very interesting. Well, on that note, perhaps we can end it. But before we go, would you like to give people one last reminder where they can find you, the podcast, and anything else you want to shout out?
Yeah, sure. So for everybody who's listening to this on a podcast app, then you can just search Simple English News Daily in your podcast app, and you can find the podcast. Or on the internet, you can go to www.send7.org, SEND7.org. And yeah, that's where you can find me. And for anybody who's watching on YouTube, hopefully by the time this is on YouTube, I will have my... have the SEND7 YouTube channel up and running. So we'll see. I think so. But yeah, if not, then go to a podcast app.
Maybe you can look down below the video and see a nice comment from you.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Like that. And
yeah,
click on the channel that way. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it, and hope the listeners have as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Pleasure to be here.
You have been listening to the Level Up English podcast. If you would like to leave a question to be answered on a future episode, then please go to levelupenglish.school/podcast. That's levelupenglish.school/podcast. And I'll answer your question on a future episode. Thanks for listening.